The question of the disciples of John the Baptist in today's gospel is a little bit amusing to me. How come thou, we and the Pharisees do fasting on many occasions, but your disciples do not? You know, if I were in the position of Jesus, I would probably have said, well, I don't know about you. Why don't you ask yourselves what you are doing it for? My way of saying, shouldn't you be answering that question yourself or yourselves? Mabait pa si Jesus, in his answer here. You see, that's the typical problem with rituals. They often turn into traditions that are passed on from generation to generation. And the original setting in which they were practiced may have been clear to those who introduced them. But in time, some of them can lose meaning or relevance if they are simply passed on mindlessly and their historical context is forgotten. One good example of a practice that is put into question and eventually discontinued is the significance of this date, July 4, for the Filipinos. Did you know that we used to celebrate July 4 as our Independence Day, as if we were also Americans celebrating July 4, 1776? The Americans did indeed claim to have granted us independence on the 4th of July in 1946. And we celebrated it as our Independence Day until in August of 1964, upon the advice of our own historians in the Philippines and the urging of nationalists, President Diosdado Macapagal signed into law the Republic Act 4166, restoring June 12 as the proper Independence Day for Filipinos, our original Independence Day. This was an effort to correct history and to assert the fact that we were already an independent nation when the Americans annexed us into their territory in 1898 as a new colony on the strength of the Treaty of Paris that ended the Spanish-American War. In our first reading today, I can see the hand of a later editor who is introducing into the original oracles of the 8th century prophet Amos his own later reading of history in the 6th century after the Babylonian exile. And whoever this editor is sort of predicting a better future for the nation, sort of rewriting history. He is looking forward to a time of restoration, a time of freedom and prosperity that would last only if they never again forget the lessons of history. So what is Jesus teaching us about history in our gospel for today? He is saying it figuratively. Listen, he says, "You do not patch an old coat with a new piece of cloth. You do not put new wine in old wine skins." That is, if you don't want to end up spoiling both. In Tagalog, sometimes we say, "Oo, tama nga, pero wala sa lugar." Meaning, you can be right, but given another context, you can be wrong because you're out of place or out of time. Sinasabi din natin sa Tagalog, may tamang lugar at panahon ang lahat ng bagay dito sa mundo. Maybe this should remind you of that famous passage in the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 3. There is an appointed time for everything and a time for every affair under the heavens. There is a time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot what has been planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter and a time to gather, a time to embrace and a time to be far from embraces, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. Perhaps we should have a better sense of history if we know the difference between time and timing in English. Magkaiba yon. And this difference is very clear in Greek, in the distinction between time as chronos and time as kairos. They have two different words for time. Between time as specific facts, like persons, events, and dates, and time, on the other hand, as the significance of these facts, kairos. When you ask, what time is it? That's chronos time. When you ask, when it is time, when is it the time to act? That is kairos. Like the things that are presently happening in the world today, or in our country, in the Philippine society, whether it be about the issue of the newly signed law, the Anti-Terror Act, or the recent killings committed by our own police institution, or the cases against journalists and media institutions, or criminal charges against specific personalities, or the 14 missing fishermen whose boat had collided with a Chinese cargo vessel in Mamburao. You know, Jesus is teaching us to ask questions. Not just what happened, but what is the context? What is the significance of these events within their given time and setting? What are these things telling us about ourselves as a nation? There was a much quoted saying by the Jewish rabbi Hillel that says, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? And being for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?" You know, this saying was paraphrased by a student activist, Dito Sarmiento, in the 70s. And it became a film. You know, it got integrated into a movie that is very popular. Vilma Santos's movie, Sister Estela L. It says, "If we do not do anything, who will? If we do not care, who will care? If not now, when?" Honestly, it sounds better in Tagalog. Kung hindi tayo kikilos, sino ang kikilos? Kung hindi tayo kikibo, sino ang kikibo? Kung hindi ngayon, kailan?